To understand the origins of World War II, we must look back to the aftermath of the Great War. The First World War devastated Europe. Millions dead, empires collapsed, and entire societies traumatized. The old order was gone, replaced by fragile new nations and deep uncertainty. The end of fighting brought relief, but not true peace or stability. Germany in particular was left humiliated and economically shattered, fueling resentment and a desire for revenge. Across Europe, grief, hardship, and political instability created fertile ground for future conflict. The Great War didn't end. It left a legacy of unresolved tensions and bitterness. Its echoes would shape the decades to come, setting the stage for an even greater catastrophe. In 1919, the Treaty of Versailles aimed to end the war and reshape Europe, but its harsh terms for Germany sowed the seeds of future conflict. Germany was forced to accept sole responsibility for the war, stripped of territory, and burdened with crippling reparations. The treaty devastated the German economy and national pride, creating widespread anger and hardship. Many Germans saw it as a humiliating diktat, not a fair peace. Instead of securing stability, Versailles fueled resentment and empowered extremist voices promising to overturn it. The treaty's legacy was a fractured Europe, primed for upheaval. In this climate of humiliation and crisis, Adolf Hitler emerged. A veteran of the Great War, Hitler channeled German anger into a radical movement, the Nazi Party. He promised to restore pride, reject Versailles, and blamed Jews and communists for Germany's woes. After a failed coup and a stint in prison, Hitler rebuilt his party, using propaganda and violence to gain followers. As economic and political chaos deepened, his message of national revival found a desperate audience. The Weimar Republic's weakness allowed Hitler to rise from fringe agitator to a force that would soon seize power. The stage was set for a dramatic and dangerous transformation. The Great Depression struck in 1929, plunging Germany into economic disaster. Unemployment soared, businesses collapsed, and millions lost hope. The Weimar government seemed powerless, fueling anger and despair. Extremist parties on both left and right gained ground, but it was Hitler's Nazis who surged ahead. Hitler blamed Germany's suffering on Jews, communists, and weak democracy, promising jobs and national greatness. By 1932, the Nazis were the largest party in parliament. Many Germans voted for Hitler out of desperation, not ideology. In January 1933, conservative elites, believing they could control him, made Hitler chancellor. They were disastrously wrong. The economic collapse had opened the door for a movement built on hate and authoritarianism. Germany's fragile democracy was swept away. The world was now on a path toward war. Once in power, Hitler moved swiftly, wasting no time in consolidating his authority and setting his sights on a much grander vision for Germany. His rise marked a turning point, not just for Germany but for the entire world, to dismantle the post-war order. The Treaty of Versailles, which had imposed harsh terms on Germany after World War I, became a primary target. Hitler saw it as a symbol of national humiliation and a barrier to Germany's rightful place in Europe. In 1936, he sent troops into the demilitarized Rhineland, a region bordering France and Belgium. This was a blatant violation of the Versailles Treaty, defying Versailles. This act of defiance was a calculated risk, testing the waters of international response. France and Britain did nothing. Their inaction, driven by a desire to avoid another war, sent a dangerous signal to Hitler. Emboldened, Hitler annexed Austria in 1938, a move known as the Anschluss, uniting Germany and Austria under Nazi rule. Again, no resistance. The lack of a strong response further fueled Hitler's belief that he could act with impunity. Next, he demanded the Sudetenland from Czechoslovakia, a region with a significant German-speaking population, claiming to protect ethnic Germans. This pretext of protecting ethnic minorities became a recurring justification for Hitler's expansionist policies. Britain and France, desperate to avoid war, pursued a policy of appeasement, hoping to satisfy Hitler's demands and maintain peace. Agreed at Munich to let Hitler take the territory, signing the Munich Agreement in September 1938. Czechoslovakia was sacrificed for peace, a decision that would later be widely condemned as a grave error in judgment. But Hitler's appetite only grew. The concessions at Munich only emboldened him further, revealing the weakness of his opponents. These unchecked aggressions gave Germany a significant boost in resources, confidence, and strategic advantage, strengthening its position on the European stage. Each step tested the resolve of Europe's democracies. their commitment to collective security and international law, and found them wanting. The policy of appeasement had failed to deter Hitler's aggression. Appeasement sent a clear message, a message of weakness and indecision. Aggression would not be stopped. This emboldened Hitler to pursue his expansionist goals even more aggressively. Hitler's ambitions expanded, encompassing vast territories and a radical reshaping of the European map, and Europe edged closer to disaster. The continent teetered on the brink of war, with tensions rising to a fever pitch. The balance of power was shifting rapidly, with Germany emerging as the dominant force in Europe. The world watched, hoping for peace, clinging to the hope that diplomacy could still avert a catastrophe, but preparing for war. Nations began to mobilize their armies, preparing for the inevitable conflict. The countdown to global conflict had begun, marking the end of an era of fragile peace and the dawn of a new, terrifying chapter in world history. The period between the two world wars, often called the interwar years, was a time of immense political and economic instability. It saw a tangled web of alliances being forged, broken, and reforged, alongside a series of failed promises that ultimately paved the way for another global conflict. These agreements, meant to secure peace and stability, instead became instruments of mistrust and ultimately, war. The League of Nations, established with the noble aim to guarantee peace and prevent future wars through diplomacy and collective security, proved tragically powerless in the face of rising aggression. Its structure was flawed, and its authority was constantly undermined by the self-interests of its member states. A critical blow to the League's legitimacy was America's decision never to join, weakening its global influence from the outset. Furthermore, even among the members who did participate, there was a distinct lack of willingness to enforce its rules and resolutions when it conflicted with their own national agendas. As Hitler's threats grew, becoming increasingly bellicose and destabilizing the fragile European order, the League's inability to effectively respond became glaringly apparent. His rhetoric of expansion and racial superiority was a direct challenge to the League's founding principles. In an attempt to contain German expansionism, France and Britain formed alliances with various Eastern European states, promising them protection against aggression. However, these pacts were ultimately weak, lacking the necessary military and political commitment to deter Hitler's ambitions. Meanwhile, Germany, under Hitler's leadership, was actively rearming and pursuing an aggressive foreign policy, defying the restrictions imposed by the Treaty of Versailles. Italy, under the fascist rule of Benito Mussolini, and Japan, with its own imperialistic designs in Asia, formed the Axis powers, united by their shared expansionist ambitions and a desire to overturn the existing world order. This alliance represented a formidable challenge to the already fragile peace. The Munich Agreement in 1938, where Britain and France appeased Hitler by ceding Czechoslovakian territory, exposed the hollowness of Western guarantees and demonstrated a lack of resolve to stand up to aggression. Czechoslovakia was abandoned to its fate, a clear signal to Hitler that the West was unwilling to risk war to defend its allies. Stalin, feeling excluded from Western diplomacy and deeply suspicious of their intentions, increasingly doubted the West's resolve to confront Hitler. He saw the Munich Agreement as evidence of their weakness and a potential attempt to direct German aggression eastward. In August 1939, the world was stunned by the announcement of the Nazi-Soviet Pact, a non-aggression treaty between sworn ideological enemies. Hitler and Stalin, motivated by pragmatic self-interest, agreed not to attack each other, a shocking reversal of previous animosity, and secretly divided Eastern Europe into spheres of influence, carving up territories like Poland and the Baltic states. This cynical deal removed Hitler's fear of a two-front war, allowing him to focus his military might on the West, and gave Stalin valuable time to prepare his own defenses and expand Soviet territory. The pact was the final, unmistakable signal that war was imminent, shattering any remaining illusions of peace. Alliances, treaties, and promises meant little in the face of naked aggression and self-interest. The pursuit of power trumped any commitment to collective security. The stage was irrevocably set for the next act of aggression, a devastating conflict that would engulf the world. The world braced itself, with a sense of dread and inevitability, for what was coming, the outbreak of World War II. Appeasement, a policy that now carries a heavy historical weight. It was the act of giving in to Hitler's escalating demands in a desperate attempt to avoid another devastating war, a strategy born of fear and a fervent hope for peace. This approach profoundly defined British and French foreign policy throughout the latter half of the 1930s, shaping their responses to the growing threat posed by Nazi Germany. It was a gamble, a calculated risk with the highest stakes imaginable. The collective memory of the horrors of World War I, with its unprecedented scale of destruction and loss, deeply influenced leaders like Neville Chamberlain, the British Prime Minister. They sincerely hoped that by offering concessions they could satisfy Germany's perceived grievances and ultimately preserve peace in Europe. They believed a rational compromise was possible. Many within the British and French establishments genuinely believed that some of Germany's grievances, particularly those stemming from the Treaty of Versailles, were legitimate and deserved to be addressed. Furthermore, a significant portion of the political elite feared the spread of communism from the Soviet Union even more than the rising threat of Nazism. This fear influenced their calculations and willingness to appease Hitler. The Munich Conference in September 1938, where Czechoslovakia was forced to cede territory to Germany, represents the high point, or perhaps the low point, of the policy of appeasement. Upon his return to London, Chamberlain famously declared he had secured peace for our time, waiving the signed agreement. However, not everyone shared Chamberlain's optimism. Critics, most notably Winston Churchill, vehemently warned that the policy of appeasement would not bring lasting peace, but would only embolden Hitler and encourage further acts of aggression and expansion. In March of 1939, Hitler definitively shattered any remaining illusions about his peaceful intentions. He flagrantly broke the promises he had made at Munich and ordered the complete military occupation and seizure of the rest of Czechoslovakia. The fragile illusion of peace so desperately clung to was irrevocably shattered. The governments of Britain and France were finally forced to confront the harsh reality that Adolf Hitler was not a man who could be reasoned with, negotiated with, or ultimately appeased. They made a crucial decision, pledging to come to the defense of Poland if it were attacked. This was a clear warning to Hitler, drawing a definitive line in the sand that he could not cross without triggering a wider conflict. The policy of appeasement was now definitively dead, a failed experiment in diplomacy. A full-scale confrontation with Nazi Germany was now seemingly inevitable, the drums of war growing louder with each passing day. The world stood precariously on the brink of a cataclysmic conflict, the likes of which had never been seen before. With Czechoslovakia conquered, Hitler turned to Poland demanding territory and access to Danzig. Poland, backed by British and French guarantees, refused to yield. The Nazi-Soviet pact cleared the way for invasion. On September 1, 1939, Germany attacked Poland using blitzkrieg tactics, fast, overwhelming force. Britain and France issued an ultimatum: withdraw or face war. Hitler ignored them, convinced they would back down. On September 3, Britain and France declared war on Germany. The invasion of Poland marked the official start of World War II. Europe was once again engulfed in conflict. The road to World War II is a stark lesson in the dangers of unresolved grievances, economic turmoil, and appeasement. The failures of Versailles, the rise of extremism, and the collapse of collective security all played their part. When hope and stability vanish, societies become vulnerable to hate and authoritarianism. Appeasement teaches us that ignoring aggression only invites greater disaster. Strong alliances and the courage to confront threats are essential for peace. Understanding this history helps us recognize warning signs in our own time. The past may not repeat exactly, but its lessons echo loudly. Remembering 1939 reminds us to guard peace and never take it for granted.